this shutdown this month and maybe the next few weeks as they try to get to a border deal impacted, what the White House will be able to do at all this year?
Well, there's nothing more valuable in politics than time, and he just gave away a lot of time on a cause that did not come together, and it's going to be very hard for him to now move to some big initiative. And at the same time, there was a big political cost for how this shutdown unfolded. His popularity fell even further, and you saw a lot of concern and upset within the Republican caucus on Capitol Hill, which thus far has stood by the president pretty solidly. So he comes out of this much weaker, and he was already in a weak position, with much less ability to move forward on any kind of grand initiative.
So, Raj, there's an advisor to the president that told our White House team there that the cave, meaning President Trump's cave on getting money from the wall, is actually a grave for Stephen Miller's policy. Stephen Miller is the hardliner on immigration who pushed for the zero tolerance policy that split families earlier actually last year, the travel ban. Do you believe that this means the end for his level of influence in the White House?
It could be. I mean, what we saw, at least from our reporting around, Politico and the New York Times, is that Jared Kushner's actual influence within the White House is growing while Stephen Miller's is shrinking. And what we saw with at least the shutdown deal is that, according to a lot of reports, is that Kushner was the one who pushed President Trump to at least capitulate with Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and the TSA, obviously the deal with the airports and obviously a lot of passengers not being able to get through airports, that really just broke their back. So, with respect to the border wall fight, in the next 3 weeks, Jared Kushner probably will have a lot of influence going into the next February 15th deadline. And it's going to be a huge, huge deal because while Trump looks like he lost here, he did lose the battle, but he didn't lose the war. There definitely is a way out for him. So I wouldn't say it's the absolute worst day of his presidency, but it's close there.
Okay, let me talk about this. You talked about the airports and the ground stop at LaGuardia, the delays at airports across the country. Julian, you wrote about this in your latest piece for CNN.com. Let's put up a portion here. You wrote that as the pain of having no government becomes clear, people usually become unhappy. Most Republicans remember this from the shutdowns in 95 to 96 and 2013. Pelosi certainly did, Trump did not, and now he's paying the price. Now, but Mick Mulvaney, his acting chief of staff, certainly remembered that. The vice president, Mike Pence, who was in the House the last time that Speaker Pelosi was speaker, he certainly remembered that, right? So compare those two, the president's, I guess, lack of experience, this being his first government job, but having two House veterans there next to him.
Well, it's lack of experience and unwillingness to listen to what's happened before. So the veterans, they're still relatively new veterans, but for sure, the veterans on Capitol Hill understood from the start this is a losing proposition. The reason government shutdowns don't work is most often, once people see what government does and what they don't have, they get upset because people count on those government services. So I don't know if the advisors around the president were either being quiet or more likely, the president doesn't really care. He doesn't care about what his advisors say. He has a very clear vision of what he wants to do, and it's often not a politically sound decision. And that's what happened. As soon as people really started feeling the effects, Republicans on the Hill were hearing about it, from government workers finally to airports closing down. If the government shuts down again in a few weeks, the same story will play out. It happens each time we do this.
So let's look across the next few weeks. Let's look ahead now, Suraj. Any expectation that the Democrats, who are now emboldened by their, as you say, their battle victory here, will be willing to agree in this conference committee to funding any of the border wall?
That's a good question, Victor, because right now there is zero incentive for Democrats to cave on anything given what they just saw on Friday. Because President Trump caving on an issue that was a central theme of his campaign, build the wall, him not getting any funding or additional funding for the border wall is huge for the Democrats, and they're just going to be obstructionists on this. It might hurt them in the polls, but as we saw, at least with President Trump, it hurts him more to cave to the Democrats.
So, Julian, if the president does not get out of this conference committee another dollar for a border barrier, steel slats, wall, whatever the decision is. You've got the two options he talked about at the end of the Rose Garden speech, either going with potentially the national emergency, which his advisors and White House lawyers and some congressional Republicans have discouraged. But there's also the potential to shut down the government again. Do you think, especially Senate Republicans, will allow that, will endure that in 3 weeks' time?
I think the second time around, you might see Republicans join Democrats in a spending bill with the numbers to override a veto. Maybe I'm wrong, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on Republicans not to put the party through another round of a political battle that is just really costing them support at a critical moment as we're starting to think of the next election. The national emergency power is going to be very tempting, meaning let the president do it, let him have that fight. He won't win it, but at least it kind of moves the battle into a different arena, and they could move on to something else.
Siraj, let me ask you, I'm admitting now, I'm asking you to speculate. The State of the Union was originally scheduled before the shutdown to happen on Tuesday. That is not happening now. Do you expect the president will be quiet on that day? Are you expecting we're going to hear from him?
No, I think the one thing President Trump at least has in his back pocket is to rail against obstructionist Democrats for not coming to the table, at least for the number 30 plus days to negotiate for funding for the border wall. You know, if there's anything that President Trump is good at doing, it's spinning the message in his favor. And whether he's going to be tweeting about it or saying it in speeches, the State of the Union really would be his opportunity to rail against Democrats to their face.
Siraj, you've characterized Democrats as obstructionist Democrats, at least twice that I've heard now in this conversation. Public polling shows that the American people don't want a wall, don't want billions of dollars to go to a barrier. So are they obstructionists, or are they executing a plan that supports what their constituents want and don't want?
Well, that's the thing. President Trump calls them obstructionists. I'm sort of just using his language right there. Because Republicans as well have been obstructionists as well, but he's not going to rail against his own party. I mean, if he was actually trying to get something done on the border wall, he would have done it when he had a majority in Congress, in the House and Senate, and he just wasn't able to get it done.
Yeah, that's what Jim Jordan said when that first continuing resolution came out in December, tweeting out, you really think it's likely we're going to get it when Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker? We've got the answer to that at Chapter 1, at least. Siraj Hashmi, Julian Zelizer, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, coming up this morning on State of the Union, Jake Tapper talks with Senator Marco Rubio. Democratic presidential candidate Julian Castro starts at 9 Eastern, right here on CNN.
So in just a couple of days, Roger Stone is going to make his second appearance in court. Now, he vows that he's not going to testify against the president. But our legal expert, Joey Jackson, says a conviction is likely, particularly if one thing happens.
Plus, a Louisiana sheriff says it's one of the worst domestic violence cases he's seen in a while. Authorities are searching right now for a 21-year-old man who they say killed his family, his girlfriend, and her family.
The whole experience was so harrowing, and afterwards I could only manage one radio interview and a speech from the steps of the courthouse and 2 appearances on television. It's horrible!
Thank you for your time, Mr. Stone.
Pardon me?
I said thank you.
Oh, no. That wasn't a question. I was saying that to the president. Pardon me!
Oh, you wondered who it was going to be. Of course, Steve Martin returning to SNL last night, taking on the role of longtime Donald Trump associate Roger Stone. Stone, of course, facing a judge on Tuesday in D.C. He's set to be arraigned on multiple charges, including witness tampering, lying, obstruction. Stone denies the charges, calling them politically motivated, and says he plans to plead not guilty. That indictment, by the way, draws the clearest link we've seen between the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks. And now President Trump is attempting to distance himself from Stone, it seems, in part quoting, Roger Stone didn't even work for me anywhere near the election. CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson with us now. Joey, always good to have you here. You wrote an op-ed for CNN, and you said this indictment doesn't just speak, it sings. What do you mean by that?
Well, first, good morning, Christy. Saturday Night Live always has a way to put things in perspective, to put them in a humorous context. Of course, in reality, this is not so humorous at all. A speaking indictment by us in the legal community is really meant to establish that an indictment is a narrative, right? An indictment itself is merely an accusation. You go before a grand jury. A grand jury has 23 people. They're not deciding guilt or innocence. They're just deciding whether there's reasonable cause to believe that a crime was committed and that X person, in this case Roger Stone, committed it. And in doing that, they lay out a narrative as to what those facts are and what they think they can prove. You know, when it tells a story, it's a speaking indictment. This, boy, does it tell a story. And so in that regard, it's not speaking, it's singing as to the nature of what the prosecutors believe is his guilt, Christy. And that guilt is laid out in a narrative in multiple respects as it relates to him obstructing the proceedings when he testified before Congress, as it relates to the multiple lies that he told Congress, as it relates to witness tampering, as it relates to his conduct with members of the top officials of the Trump campaign. And so there is a lot packed within here, and I don't necessarily believe that it's very difficult for a prosecutor to prove the allegations contained therein.
Yeah, you're right that he's facing almost certain conviction if the evidence outlined is accurate. There is an article in Newsweek this morning. Former CIA Director John Brennan said this in this article: "I think the shoes that are yet to drop are going to be the ones that are going to be the most profound and that will hit the people at the top of the organization, the Trump campaign, people that he believes the American public knows very well or is very familiar with." Do you see more indictments coming? And who do you see could be targeted? I mean, when he says people that we all already know, is he talking about Donald Trump Jr.?
Well, you know, Christy, I always hate to speculate as to what the special counsel is doing. Don't want to be irresponsible, but I will say this. I will say that, you know, prosecutors have tremendous leverage. And the leverage they have, they apply to people because we can all bluster as Stone has blustered. I'll never bear false witness against this president. I'll never be induced into lying about things that are not true. We've heard, Manafort defiant. He goes to trial. Oh, now all of a sudden he wants to cooperate. We've heard, of course, Michael Cohen, I'll take a bullet for the president, and then he flips and he's telling all. And so ultimately what happens is that by getting this indictment out there and by getting Roger Stone, and you talked initially about how this is the closest connection to the Trump campaign yet, it lays it out. He was communicating with members of the Trump campaign. You've got damaging emails coming out by WikiLeaks. Now you got him. And when he's in the barrel, right, he was talking about Podesta, Hillary being in the barrel. Now that he's in the barrel, to what extent could you gain his cooperation? Seems unlikely now, but moving forward, when the pressure is applied and when you're 64 years young and you're facing multiple years in jail, who else will you tell on? Could it be Don Jr.? Could it be someone else? We won't know. We won't guess. But I could tell you this, that there will be another shoe dropping. I firmly believe there will be additional indictments. And as to the connection and the collusion, it's yet to be seen, but it may very well exist. We don't yet know.
So court documents, at the end of the day, right now for Stone, the court documents help him to some degree, don't they? Because now he understands the charges. He and his lawyers know what he's facing. Does that help him? And I mean, if you had to defend him, what would you do? How would you do it?
Well, you know, Chrissy, it depends upon what we mean by help him, because this indictment buries him. It buries him in as much as
but he
you don't
knows
have
how to fight it, I guess.
Exactly. That's and I'm getting to that, right? Which is, of course, your point. Now he knows how to fight it. But it buries him in as much as he can say all he wants, that it doesn't establish collusion at all, doesn't establish any involvement with the Trump campaign. Doesn't matter. What it establishes is that you were called before the House committee. You were responding to questions that were asked of you. You were asked very clearly multiple questions. You gave multiple wrong answers as to intermediaries, as to possession of documents, as to what you do when you knew it. And so the reality is that it does help in as much as it now applies that pressure on him. What can he say in terms of his defenses? I was misunderstood. I was taken out of context. Certainly, I had no intention at all to give false evidence or information. I was basing my answers on the recollection that I had at that particular time. You were asking me questions that are immaterial to the ultimate question of collusion, and therefore, to the extent that they're immaterial and not probative and relevant, how could I be deemed a criminal, right? But we have this saying in law, Christy, and what it is as follows, and it's said oftentimes: when the facts are on your side, argue the facts. When the law's on your side, argue the law. When neither are on your side, you pound the table. And so what I'm expecting is a lot of the pounding of the table if he's moving forward. Special counsel investigation is flawed. This is politically motivated. And, you know, it could garner some sympathy, but at the end of the day, how far does that take you? I don't think it takes him very far.
And Joey, I've heard, I only have a couple seconds left, but one of the things I realized in listening to what he's saying, he says a lot of there is no evidence, but I don't hear him saying, I did not do this.
It's very interesting, Christy, because that's a critical point and it's a critical distinction. You said it all, right? So he's not saying he didn't do it. He's saying there's no evidence, but there is a ton of evidence as it relates to what he says that he didn't have, possession of documents that the FBI now has, the intermediaries he uses. There's 2, he said 1, direct contacts with WikiLeaks. There's a ton of information as to him lying. And then, of course, Christy, I know you got to go, but when he says, to Corsi, in terms of the informant, he's talking to him about don't say anything, plead the fifth, get your story in line with mine. Corsi's telling him, just tell the truth. You were the one who got yourself in here. That's what we call witness tampering, and that's pretty compelling.
All righty. Joey Jackson, you've got a lot in there for us today. Thank you, sir. Good to see you as always.
Always. Have a great day, Christy.
You too.
Police say a man in Louisiana killed his parents, his girlfriend, and her parents. And now they don't know where he is. We've got the latest on this huge manhunt coming up. Plus, what do you get when you take bone-chilling temperatures? I'm talking so cold. Add some snow, and then add even colder temperatures. You get a disaster. Look at this.
This is CNN Breaking News.
28 minutes past the hour right now. So glad to have you here. I'm Christy Paul.
How has this
good to be with
shut
you.
down this month?
Deputies in Louisiana right now are searching for a man, this 21-year-old, they say, killed 5 people near Baton Rouge yesterday.
We know that his name is Dakota Terrio. Police say he killed his girlfriend, her father, and her brother, and then killed his own parents. Here's CNN correspondent Kaylee Hartung.
Victor, Christie, Saturday morning, Elizabeth and Keith Terrio were shot in their home. When police responded, they were able to identify their 21-year-old son, Dakota Terrio, as the man who shot them. The husband and wife both later died in the hospital in Baton Rouge. Now, as Ascension Parish authorities began a manhunt for the killer of 2, in the meantime, authorities in neighboring Livingston Parish began an investigation after they found 3 family members murdered in their home, Billy, Summer, and Tanner Ernest. And once the 2 agencies spoke to one another, they realized they were looking for the same man, Dakota Terrio, as Dakota is believed to have had a relationship with one member of the Ernest family. Authorities say they do not believe he is still in that area of Louisiana. They have reason to believe he is headed east towards Mississippi, and they have shared this photo of the pickup truck they think he's driving, stolen from the Ernest family. You see this 2004 gray Dodge Ram pickup truck. It has a Louisiana license plate number C583809. Here's more from the Ascension Parish Sheriff.
The good news is we know who did this, and we will soon find this person and put him in jail where he belongs. This is probably, I would say, one of the worst domestic violence incidents I've seen in quite a while. For a young man to walk into a bedroom and kill his mother and his father, and then kill friends in Livingston that he had a connection with.
The sheriff went on to say he believes this is an isolated incident. He doesn't believe anyone else is a target for murder by Dakota Terrio, but he is armed and dangerous. So, Victor Christie, that means anyone he comes into contact with could be a target.
Carrie Hartung, thank you so much. All righty, look at that mess. I hope that you are not in it, but there are 30 million people across the country who are under winter weather alerts because of weather like this. Some in the Midwest. You're going to see 1.5 feet of snow just between today and tomorrow.
So then there's this cold blast expected to hit parts of the Midwest and the Northeast. And this week, both Minneapolis and Chicago. Listen to this. Their high temperatures, we're not accounting for wind here. The high temperatures in Minneapolis and Chicago expected to be in the negative teens.
Look at that girl. She's like, cover my face. I got to cover my face.
Why does my face hurt? CNN meteorologist Allison Chinchar is tracking the system from the CNN Weather Center. Listen, we're talking about these temperatures, but this is dangerous.
Yes. It is. It is. At those kind of temperatures, even without the wind chill, you can have frostbite set in incredibly quickly, but you are going to have the wind to factor in too. And we also have snow to factor in as well. Right now, the snow is mainly focused over the Northeast. Cities like Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany getting the snow right now. But it's the next system we all have our eyes on. This is the one that's going to be coming down from Canada, pushing into areas of the Midwest. This is where we have blizzard warnings, winter storm warnings, things like that. Here's a look at that system as it really starts to push in later on today. It will be rain on the southern end, so places like Kansas City and St. Louis, but look at places like Chicago, Green Bay. You're not just going to get a little snow, you're going to get a lot of snow, even though this system is actually a very fast moving system. Widespread amounts across the Midwest, about 4 to 8 inches, but there will be some spots where you see that pink that will pick up well over a foot of snow before this system finally pushes out. The other thing to note, it's not just for the Midwest. Snow is actually expected to stretch into the deep south. States like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, even Tennessee have the potential to get some snow out of the system before it finally pushes out. When it does push out, it's going to bring incredibly cold air along that backside. So cold, places in Florida are actually expected to get below freezing. However, the hardest hit area is certainly going to be the Midwest. Take, for example, Chicago. Here's a look at the 7-day forecast. The average is 31. You've only got 2 out of the next 7 days that are going to be spent above that mark, but we'll more than make up for it in the middle portion of the week. Again, that high temperature on Wednesday, minus 15. Keep in mind, with a wind, it's not even going to feel that warm. Also, to put something into perspective here for Chicago, that high we just talked about of minus 15, in the last 20 years, we have only had 2 other days, Victor and Christy, where the temperature and the high temperature has actually gotten below 0. So that just goes to show you that even for a cold place like Chicago, this is incredibly rare.
And that is brutal. It's like pins hitting your face.
Yeah, your eyelids freeze. Allison Chinchar, thanks so much. New developments from
39 minutes past the hour right now, and in just a few weeks, Congressman Steve King's political career seems to have gone south. He allegedly defended white supremacy. He's been criticized by his own party leaders and stripped of his committee positions in Congress.
But despite all of that, at a town hall in Iowa, the Republican said he is not racist. CNN's Sarah Seidner has details.
First of all, you know, the big subject that's before us all, that some might refer to as the elephant in the room, is a situation of a New York Times quote.
A quote that his own party thought was so racist, they stripped Congressman Steve King of his congressional committee assignment. In it, he says, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive? Why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization?
He chose those words and punctuated them the way he did. But what I was addressing was not those terms of white supremacy or white nationalism, but when I said, why did that language become offensive, I was speaking exclusively and directly about Western civilization. They are denigrating Western civilization today.
King spoke to his constituents in Primgar, Iowa, his first town hall since the controversy. Primgar's claim to fame, the only place in the world named Primgar. It is a town with a mayor, but no stoplight, an elementary school, but no high school, a place small enough where most residents know each other by name.
I didn't even know he was coming until earlier this week. They announced it.
King also gave his Twitter followers a 5-minute warning that he'll be starting a potentially volatile town hall in Primgar, Iowa. He then walked into what turned out to be a very warm reception.
Thank you. Wow.
And we love your conservatism, and we pray that they never silence you.
One adoring constituent praised him and said she is bothered by what she called reverse racism. King agreed and then pivots.
And one of the things that I was bothered by when you had this problem was the reverse racism toward a white European man that founded this country. And that's the values that we're built on. And we have to be embarrassed to say anymore that we're white European background. And I think that is wrong. And I think we need to push back. And I think we need to take the sting out of the words racism.
We can do the things that you've described, and we can at the same time embrace everything that Dr. Martin Luther King taught us all at the same time. And if we had stuck with his vision, we wouldn't be in the place we're in today in this society and this country.
There were a few frustrations expressed, one constituent asking for help invigorating her small town's economy.
What are you tangibly going to do, like in Congress, fight for us, advocate for us? I need tangible actions.
Well, would you give me a tangible recommendation?
I don't know. I'm just so frustrated.
Another gentleman asking how the congressman plans to help with the lack of visas for migrant workers to help work the farms.
What are you doing to help the temporary ag worker program?
Until we can secure our border, we aren't going to be able to have a constructive dialogue on the balance of this. But I will support a bonded program, and a bonded program that is hopefully tailored to meet some of these labor needs that we have.
Not a single person asked about his prior racist comments. But when we asked what his constituents thought about his comments, we got an earful. Are you concerned that you have a congressman who is racist?
I do have a congressman who's racist. I was concerned about it during the whole last election cycle. That's why I worked hard for his opponent, J.D. Scholten, because I know my congressman's a racist.
He's a good Christian man. He's. If he was a racist, I wouldn't be his friend. I'm not a racist. I have relatives, brother-in-laws, nieces, nephews that are black. Okay.
But you do realize that language, I have a friend that's black, I have a family member that's black, a lot of people see that as somebody who's trying to cover up racist beliefs.
Just you saying that makes, as far as I'm concerned, makes you racist. You thinking I'm
Trust
racist
me, I'm not.
because I'm white?
No, I'm just telling you that some of the language that you're using and some of the language that Congressman King has used.
I think the language you're using is racist.
Okay. What you were quoted. King didn't hang around to answer that question or any others from reporters. And when you talk about they and civilization making a problem, who do you mean by they?
I've just got to go. I'm sorry, but let me close the door, please.
And our thanks to CNN Sarah Seidner, who obviously was there in Iowa.
Excuse me. It's a story that will leave you a bit confused, asking for some answers. 3 complete strangers who found out 19 years later that they were all separated at birth. I sat down with the director of the CNN film, 3 Identical Strangers.